The lights in the studio burned hot, casting a sharp glow over the polished set of the primetime political show. Jessica Tarlov, seated in her signature posture with crossed arms and an arched eyebrow, was ready to pounce. She had rehearsed her lines, sharpened her tone, and told herself this would be the night she broke Karoline Leavitt once and for all. The producers wanted drama, and Jessica was ready to deliver it. From the moment Karoline walked onto the stage, carrying nothing but a calm smile and her trademark confidence, Jessica's expression hardened. This wasn't going to be a conversation, it was set up as a collision. The audience felt it immediately. The chatter quieted down as the host barely got through the introductions. Jessica wasted no time. She leaned forward, voice cutting like a blade. "You're finished, Karoline. Your career, your voice, your credibility, it all ends tonight." The words weren't just pointed, they were delivered with a kind of smug certainty, the confidence of someone who thought the applause was already hers. Cameras zoomed in, capturing the intensity on her face, waiting for Karoline to flinch, to stumble, to hesitate. But Karoline didn't. Instead, she tilted her head, her eyes steady, her composure unshaken. The silence after Jessica's shout was louder than the insult itself. The studio seemed to freeze for a beat, the tension coiling like a spring. Every viewer at home leaned in closer, sensing that this wasn't going to be just another cable news spat. Jessica had thrown her punch, and the nation waited to see if Karoline would duck, or strike back harder. Karoline didn't rush. She didn't raise her voice. She let the silence stretch just long enough to make everyone uncomfortable, then leaned forward, one hand resting firmly on the table. Her voice came out steady, cool, cutting through the air like steel. "Jessica, the only thing finished here tonight is the game you've been playing." The words landed like a thunderclap. Gasps rippled through the audience. The host blinked in shock. Even Jessica herself leaned back, momentarily disarmed. Karoline hadn't just answered the insult, she had turned it inside out, exposing Jessica's intent, and making her look like the one cornered. What was supposed to be a one-sided takedown had just flipped, live, in front of millions of viewers. The host tried to wedge in a reset, new topic, softer landing, but Jessica lunged for momentum before it slipped away. She snapped a stack of highlighted printouts onto the desk, pages fluttering like warning flags. "Let's deal in facts," she said, chin up, voice tight. "Polling. Timeline. Your contradictions." A camera swooped in. Highlighter streaks glowed neon, as if certainty could be colored in. She tapped one line with her pen. "Right here, you said the border is secure by design. 2 months later you called it a man-made crisis. Which is it?" She didn't look at the paper. She looked at the audience, selling the performance. Karoline didn't take the bait. She slid the printout toward herself, scanned a breath, and then, the smallest smile. "That first line is an op-ed headline written by an editor," she said evenly. "Not a quote. The second line is mine, on air, and it's the one I stand by. Context matters." Her fingertip traced the footer of the page. "And if we're dealing in facts, this is a secondary recap that cut off the paragraph where I explained federal incentives driving the surge. That paragraph is missing." She raised her eyes, not to Jessica, but to the lens. Funny how the part that complicates the narrative always vanishes. A murmur rippled through the bleachers. Jessica stiffened, pivoting to the next sheet. "Then explain this, your claim about sanctuary policies and repeat offenders, debunked." She flashed a blog graphic, triumphant. Karoline didn't even look at it. She reached into her folio and placed a slim, black tablet on the desk. The screen lit the set with a cool glow. Local court logs. Publicly available. Redacted victims. 6 cases over 8 weeks, same jurisdiction, same loophole. "We requested the records. Anyone can." She slid the tablet closer so the Steadicam could drink it in. On-screen dates and case numbers rolled like a quiet avalanche. The host blinked, lost his script. Jessica pressed forward, voice rising. Anecdotes don't beat data. Karoline nodded. Exactly. That's why we brought both. She tapped again. A dashboard of city statistics populated the frame: arrests, dismissals, re-entries. Your blog post cites a single aggregated study with a cohort window that excludes the last 12 months. Our poll is month by month. Apples to apples. She didn't gloat. She didn't crow. She just let the numbers sit there like a verdict. You could feel the oxygen shift. The audience wasn't clapping, they were listening, which is worse for a pundit than booze. Jessica's pen started clicking, a metronome of nerves. You're cherry-picking to smear cities you don't even live in. Karoline's reply was almost gentle. This isn't about geography. It's about accountability. If the policy's good, it stands up to sunlight. If it's fragile, it shatters under basic questions. The host gestured for a break. The control room delayed it, sensing a moment. Jessica leaned in, lowering her voice to a hiss masked as civility. You come on shows like this to look polished and righteous, but it's all theater. Karoline's answer was the line that bent the night. She didn't look at Jessica, she looked into the lens again, speaking past her. If truth is theater, then let the receipts be the spotlight. The boom mic caught the breath the audience took in unison. The red tally light stayed on. No cut. No exit. Just 2 chairs, 1 table, and a narrative beginning to flip. Jessica wasn't ready to let the ground slip from under her. She leaned forward, her elbows cutting into the desk, and spoke with a sharper edge. You keep acting like you've uncovered something no one else can see. But the reality is, you're spinning partial truths to rile up your base. Her tone was almost triumphant, as though she'd found the winning move. The audience tensed, sensing sparks. Karoline didn't move an inch, her calmness now the most aggressive thing in the room. She slid the tablet closer to Jessica, the blue-white glow reflecting in both their faces. You can call it spin, but numbers don't bend for me or you. Look at them. 6 months. 9 repeat cases. Same jurisdiction. That's not a talking point, it's a pattern. Karoline's voice carried steady conviction, and the audience hung on each syllable. She paused, then added, and if you think the public can't handle that truth, maybe it's not me underestimating them. The audience erupted in a wave of applause that caught Jessica off guard. Her jaw tightened. She picked up one of her sheets again, tapping it with her pen like a gavel. You love parading isolated stats to stir outrage. But you're not an expert, Karoline, you're an opportunist. The insult hung heavy, designed to sting. Karoline let it sit for half a beat before answering. She turned toward Jessica, her expression sharpened into a challenge. If telling people what's happening in their own communities is opportunism, then maybe the experts have failed them. Maybe that's why I'm here, and why your papers aren't enough to shut this down. The control room, sensing the shift, split the broadcast into a tight double shot, Jessica on the left, her pen tapping nervously, and Karoline on the right, sitting unflinching in the storm. The contrast was stark, one frantic, one composed. The audience could feel the imbalance. They murmured, not against Karoline, but in her favor, their energy tilting the atmosphere. Jessica tried to cut in again, but Karoline overrode her without raising her voice, eyes fixed on the camera. This isn't about me. It's about whether leaders admit failure when policies collapse. And when the truth is inconvenient? People like you would rather label the messenger than confront the evidence. It was precise, deliberate, a blade disguised as calm commentary. The room erupted again, this time louder, a mix of cheers and gasps. The host tried to restore control, but the broadcast had already tipped. Karoline had flipped the tempo. Jessica's frustration was boiling over now. Her voice cracked as she leaned into the mic. You think applause makes you right? You think a few cherry-picked numbers erase decades of real policy work? She slammed her papers down, the sound echoing like a gavel, but it only amplified the image of desperation. The studio lights caught the tension in her face, while Karoline sat steady, her poise cutting deeper than any rebuttal could. Karoline turned slowly toward Jessica, then back to the camera, her voice calm but sharpened with steel. "No, applause doesn't make me right. Facts do. And what you just called cherry-picked are people's lives, families who are still waiting for someone in power to admit the system failed them." She leaned slightly closer to the desk, her hand pressing firmly against the glass surface, as though grounding her words. The audience hushed, sensing something about to break. Jessica tried to seize the pause. She jumped back in, her tone rising. "Don't play savior, Karoline. You're not the answer, they don't need you turning their pain into a spotlight for your brand." Her words were sharp, meant to wound, but they landed like blunt objects. Karoline tilted her head, almost sympathetically, before delivering a response that hit harder than a shout ever could. "You call it branding. I call it refusing to look away. If your version of leadership means ignoring the people you claim to protect, then maybe that's why you're so uncomfortable when someone refuses to play by your script." Her eyes locked on Jessica's, unwavering, daring her to respond. The audience erupted again, this time louder and more visceral. Some clapped, others shouted affirmations, their energy feeding Karoline's momentum. Jessica's shoulders stiffened, her pen now motionless in her hand, as if she realized her usual arsenal had been stripped bare. The host nervously tried to cut to a commercial break, but the control room held on the live feed, the tension was too raw, too electrifying to interrupt. Karoline leaned back, letting the noise swell. Then, almost like a dagger cloaked in velvet, she added one more line, straight into the camera: "The truth doesn't need permission to speak. And it sure doesn't need Jessica Tarlov's approval." The audience roared, and the host's eyes widened. The momentum had shifted entirely. Jessica wasn't controlling the stage anymore, Karoline was. Jessica, sensing the ground slipping under her, tried a sharp pivot. Her voice took on that familiar mix of exasperation and superiority. "You're great at sound bites, Karoline. Twitter eats it up, but governance isn't about viral clips. It's about compromise, policy, and responsibility, things you don't even begin to understand." She punctuated her words with a forced laugh, the kind meant to reclaim control, but it only deepened the cracks in her armor. Karoline didn't flinch. She let Jessica's words hang in the air for a beat, then leaned forward, her tone even but laced with finality. "Governance isn't about compromise when compromise means people lose. It isn't about responsibility when that responsibility is only to a party line. And it isn't about policy when the policies fail real Americans." Her hand tapped the desk lightly, each tap underscoring her point. Jessica opened her mouth to interject, but Karoline raised a single finger. Not rudely, but commandingly, and the audience hushed in sync. "You call it Twitter fodder. I call it cutting through the noise. Because every time you hide behind bureaucracy, families are left waiting for someone, anyone, to care more about truth than optics. And tonight, you're upset not because I'm wrong, but because you can't silence me." The room froze. Jessica's face shifted, caught between anger and disbelief. The studio camera zoomed in, capturing the contrast, Jessica's forced composure unraveling, Karoline's steady gaze piercing through. The audience reaction was explosive. Some shouted Karoline's name, others clapped so hard the host's attempts to quiet them were futile. A chant began to rise, low but gaining momentum: "Karoline, Karoline." The kind of raw crowd energy that doesn't just fill a room but electrifies it. Jessica sat back, her pen snapping in her hand as if echoing the breaking point of her argument. She looked at the host for rescue, but the cameras stayed live, feeding the moment straight into millions of living rooms. Karoline turned to the camera again, her closing words slicing through the chaos like a blade. "You wanted a soundbite, Jessica? Here it is. America doesn't need excuses anymore. It needs leaders unafraid to speak the truth." The chant erupted into a roar, drowning out every attempt Jessica made to regain the stage. In that instant, the interview wasn't Jessica's anymore. It belonged entirely to Karoline. Jessica, cornered and humiliated, reached for the only weapon left, a personal attack. Her voice rose, sharp and unsteady. You think you're some kind of political prodigy, Karoline? You're young, untested, and reckless. You've never run a country, never sat in the weight of real power. All you've got are cheap lines that rile up crowds, but that's not leadership, it's performance. The jab was meant to sting, to dismiss Karoline as a novice unworthy of the stage. For a split second, the audience held its breath, unsure if the words had finally landed a blow. But Karoline didn't flinch. She tilted her head slightly, her lips curving into a smile that wasn't warm, it was sharp, deliberate, the smile of someone about to deliver the kill shot. You're right about one thing, Jessica, she said, her voice calm but cutting through the room like steel. I haven't sat in the halls of power like you. And maybe that's why I don't carry the same baggage of failure. Because while you were busy trading titles, people were losing their homes. While you were rehearsing talking points, small businesses were closing their doors. And while you call this performance, I call it accountability, the kind politicians like you forgot long ago. The words landed like thunder. Jessica blinked rapidly, her expression faltering as the audience erupted in cheers. Karoline didn't give her a second to recover. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on Jessica. You dismiss me as untested. Maybe that's exactly what scares you. Because I represent millions of Americans who are sick of watching the so-called tested politicians fail them over and over again. And tonight, Jessica, you've proven their point, you're not defending truth. You're defending a broken system. The studio ignited. Viewers at home could feel the ground shifting. Jessica's attempt to belittle Karoline had backfired, magnifying her weakness instead. She looked down at her notes, flipping papers with trembling fingers, but the camera was merciless, it caught every flicker of desperation. Karoline's final words in the moment sealed it, so go ahead, call me young, call me reckless. But understand this, sometimes it takes fresh eyes to see through old lies. The audience roared, and Jessica's pen slipped from her hand, clattering to the desk. It wasn't just a metaphor, it was the sound of her control shattering in real time. Jessica, visibly rattled, tried to summon what strength she had left. Her voice cracked but she raised it anyway, hoping volume could mask weakness. You don't get it, Karoline, you're dangerous. People like you destabilize democracy. You rile up crowds, you spread division, and you think tearing down institutions is a solution. That's not leadership, that's chaos. The words echoed across the studio, but instead of rallying support, they sounded like a last gasp. The audience shifted uncomfortably, some shaking their heads, others booing. The word dangerous hung in the air, but not as Jessica intended, it carried desperation. Karoline let the silence stretch just long enough to tighten the grip of suspense. Then, with a steady voice, she dismantled the accusation piece by piece. Dangerous, she repeated, leaning slightly forward. Jessica, what's dangerous is ignoring people who are suffering. What's dangerous is silencing debate in the name of democracy. What's dangerous is a political class so insulated that they confuse accountability with chaos. You don't fear me, you fear what I represent, truth without a filter, and people who won't be silenced anymore. The crowd erupted in applause. Jessica's eyes flickered, caught between fury and fear. But Karoline wasn't finished. She lowered her voice, almost like she was speaking directly to every viewer at home. Do you know what real chaos looks like? It's families choosing between groceries and rent. It's veterans waiting months for basic care. It's kids growing up believing they don't matter because leaders like you spend more time on television than fixing problems. That's chaos. That's dangerous. And the fact that you call my voice a threat proves you're out of touch with the very people you claim to serve. The camera zoomed in on Jessica's face, and the contrast was brutal. Where Karoline looked unshaken, Jessica's expression betrayed defeat. The audience roared louder, the energy now completely on Karoline's side. Karoline delivered the closing strike with chilling precision. You accuse me of division. But the truth is, sometimes the line between lies and truth must be drawn, and I won't apologize for standing on the right side of it." The room thundered. Jessica's shoulders sank. She had gone in swinging, but now sat silent, her authority collapsing under the weight of Karoline's words. Jessica's voice rose one last time, her hand slamming the desk as if the echo alone could overpower the words she had lost. The camera zoomed in, capturing the frustration etched across her face. "You think you've won because you shout louder? Because you throw your little slogans around? You're nothing but a mouthpiece, nothing more." Her attempt to regain control dripped with anger, but it was clear she was no longer steering the exchange. Karoline leaned back in her chair, her composure unshaken. She didn't need to raise her voice, the calm precision of her words was enough to slice through the room. "Jessica, you confuse confidence with noise, and truth with spin. The problem isn't that I speak louder. The problem is that when I speak, people know I mean it. And when you speak, they hear a script." The studio audience murmured, the weight of that line landing like a verdict. Jessica shifted uncomfortably, her prepared notes suddenly looking useless in her hands. She had built her reputation on sharp rebuttals and talking points, but tonight they sounded flimsy, almost theatrical. Karoline's words had pierced through the performance, forcing viewers to question not just Jessica's argument, but the entire structure it stood on. The host tried to intervene, to smooth the escalating clash, but the viewers could see it, Jessica's dominance on the panel had crumbled. Karoline didn't gloat, she simply delivered her point with a level stare, allowing silence to do the rest. Sometimes, silence isn't weakness, it's a hammer blow. The tension in the room had reached a point where every breath felt electric. Jessica leaned forward, desperate to claw back credibility. "You think the public buys this act of yours? You're young, reckless, and out of your depth. I've been doing this for years, you'll burn out before you even make a mark." Her voice cracked slightly at the end, betraying a nervous tremor she hadn't meant to show. Karoline didn't flinch. She raised her hand slightly, not to silence Jessica, but to reclaim the floor with authority that felt natural, not forced. "You've been doing this for years, Jessica, and what do you have to show for it? A record of excuses, a habit of deflection, and an audience that's growing tired of being lied to. You say I'll burn out? Maybe. But at least I'll burn with the truth, and people will remember that long after they've forgotten your speeches." The words landed like a sledgehammer. Jessica blinked rapidly, searching for a reply, but the confidence that had powered her earlier attacks was gone. The audience's reaction told the story, some clapped, some gasped, but all were locked onto Karoline. Karoline leaned in, lowering her voice so that the cameras caught the intensity. "Here's the difference between us, you fight to stay relevant. I fight because the people who sent me here demand better. That's not performance, it's responsibility. And that's something you've clearly forgotten." Jessica froze, caught in the crosshairs of a truth she couldn't spin. The studio silence was deafening, broken only by the faint shuffle of papers in her trembling hands. In that moment, the balance of power was not just tipped, it was overturned completely. Jessica sat stiff, clutching her notes like a shield that had already been shattered. Her eyes darted toward the cameras, searching for a lifeline, but the silence of the crowd told her none was coming. Every word she had thrown at Karoline had bounced back harder, sharper, undeniable. Karoline let the moment breathe, seconds stretched like eternity. Then, in a voice calm yet cutting, she delivered the line that would echo across every replay and headline. "You wanted to end me, Jessica? Congratulations, you just ended yourself." The words were like a blade, swift, final, and impossible to twist. Gasps filled the air, followed by a surge of applause that broke the studio's controlled atmosphere. Some stood to their feet, clapping with the conviction of people who knew they had witnessed more than just a political spat. They had seen a turning point. Jessica tried to speak, but the weight of Karoline's words had already crushed her defense. Her lips moved, but no sound followed. She looked smaller, cornered not by her opponent, but by the truth she could no longer deny. Karoline didn't linger on the victory. She turned slightly toward the camera, her gaze steady, as if addressing the nation directly. When you stand for the people, the truth speaks louder than any insult. That's why I'll keep fighting, no matter who tries to shut me down. The audience roared again, drowning out whatever remained of Jessica's resolve. The clip would spread like wildfire online, the headline practically wrote itself. And in that defining moment, Karoline proved that sometimes one line is all it takes to turn an attack into history. Tonight wasn't about me, and it certainly wasn't about Jessica. It was about the truth, and the truth doesn't need permission to be spoken. Too many times, we've seen leaders stand on stages, armed with rehearsed lines and empty rhetoric, trying to convince you that their script is reality. But the people watching at home, the working families, the small business owners, the young Americans wondering if they'll even have a voice in their own future, they deserve more than that. I came here knowing the attacks would come, knowing the insults would be thrown, and knowing the attempts to silence me would be strong. But what we proved tonight is simple: when you stand firmly for what you believe in, no smear is powerful enough to erase the truth. Jessica tried to define me. She tried to label me. But the moment you let others dictate your worth, you've already surrendered. I refuse to surrender, to her, to Washington insiders, or to the narrative the media wants to write. My loyalty belongs to the American people, and that will never change. So remember this: politics isn't theater, though some want it to be. Politics is about real lives, real struggles, and real hope for a stronger tomorrow. If my opponents think they can scare me into silence, they are mistaken. If they think they can shout me down, they will learn what we all saw tonight, that their noise only makes the truth louder. And to every young woman, every underdog watching right now, don't wait for someone to hand you permission to fight. Take the mic, speak your truth, and never let anyone tell you you're finished, because your story has only just begun.